All right, I'm live. Do I have anyone viewing though? Nope, it shows I have no one viewing. Doubting Thomas was in 11:40. Will Freeman was here at 8:20. I do have one viewer. Okay, so apologies. I was originally going to do this when I was at work. Because sometimes I'm able to do that while I'm at work, but last night was an exception, so I had to postpone and wait till this morning to do it. So I just come home from work not too long ago, and so here we go. What I'm going to be going over today is, uh, so I was over at Hillary's emails channel the during the weekend. I think it was Sunday. I think it was Sunday. Um, and Jill was there, and we got to talking a little bit about slavery. But then afterward, I couldn't stay. I had to leave so I could go to work. And while I was at work, I noticed that Jill was live, and I went over there and got on his stream and talked to him just a little bit. I wouldn't say it was a conversation, and I made some glaring mistakes, but in a way, the mistakes um, did kind of draw out some things from him. So in a way, those mistakes were beneficial for anybody who wants to have a future, like any kind of conversation with him about this topic later. But I'm not going to. I'm gonna put the stream up here in just a little bit, and I will do some commentary about our conversation together. Um, hey, Kent Hovind, is Jefferson still alive, or did he go MAGA? And what happened to Pine Creek? It's good to hear from you again, Jay. Nice to see you, Kent Hovind. Kent Hovind, CPA. Yeah, he hasn't gone MAGA. Yes, he's still alive. Don't know what happened to Pine Creek. And so yeah, he just doesn't do a lot of content like I don't do a lot of content anymore. Sometimes he goes over and does he'll join Christopher Maudy on his stream on his channel and do some stuff. So the purpose of this video, normally I had sworn off doing anything to deal with any kind of Jill's or rebuke and reproves content. But because I had that conversation, a little bit of a conversation with him over at Hillary's emails channel, and I saw that he was live and he was basically kind of coping with what happened over there. I was like, well, I'll and I joined, I tried to talk to him, but it didn't work out so well. And like I said, I made some mistakes, but I think those mistakes worked out to kind of, like I said, show some moves that he may or may not have done if I had just agreed. So I'm gonna pull this up. I've got this set at when I came in on his live stream when I was at work, and he shows me his biblical slavery. This is where Jill shows me his biblical slavery. Oh, that's interesting. Sorry, I just had a squirrel moment there. Sorry, Pine Creek just disappeared. I wondered if he died. Pine Creek fled the internet about the time Trump started getting really icy with the immigrants. Weird. Um, yeah, that's from Michael Deaton. Yep. So, hi, Michael Deaton. I wish Jeff could come back more though, for sure. Yeah, a lot of people have said that. So I'm going to try not to make. I'm probably going to open this up so that other people can give their input as well. But for right now, I'm just going to start the video, and I'm going to try not to belabor it too long. But like I said, there is a very easy way of beating Jill's biblical challenge based on the way that he the way that he puts it. Let me know if everybody can hear the video or not.
In order for it to be an argument, it is still in the syllogism form. It just doesn't have those P1, P2 designations. So I did you the favor and I put it in that format for you.
Can everybody hear that? Okay?
That's what I'm sharing now. Okay, I put it in the format just for you, so that Hillary doesn't think that this isn't an argument because it's not in the
Can everybody hear the video?
right format. Oh, these people are so afraid of me. It's not.
Yeah, nobody's really afraid of you. It's just a matter of whether or not they want to tolerate you or not. So just asking the audience, is that audio for that video? Is that coming through okay? Okay. Thanks, Elsie. All right. So here's the biblical slavery challenge.
Not even funny. All right, this is my biblical slavery challenge. Hey, how's it going, Brett Keene?
And by the way, this was a mistake for me to even go in here and even have this conversation. It's better to just do this offsides than to actually try to converse with Jill directly. It's a pain in the ass. If Will Freeman was here earlier, he said howdy before I started. I noticed he said bows respectfully. I hope he's still viewing, because I guess Will has also had this conversation about slavery being endorsed in the Bible with Jill, and Jill basically just keeps claiming that he's beat everyone at this. So I'm just going to go ahead and read this very, very quickly. Biblical slavery challenge. Premise 1. The Hebrews used quote unquote slavery to denote both voluntary and involuntary servants. Right, that's the first premise. And if you notice, slavery there is in quotes, right? So the Hebrews, according to Jill, used some term that is slavery to denote that this just basically means servants, voluntary or involuntary. So the condition, the term slavery, it doesn't matter if they're voluntary or involuntary. It's just servants. Whether they, because I mean, you can either be a servant or you're not you're either a servant or you're not. And in this case, if you're a servant, you can either be of the condition that you are involuntarily a servant or you're voluntarily a servant. But he doesn't define what actually a servant is. He's just kind of appealing to the overall usage of the term servant.
Brett Keene.
The second one is the only scenarios in which involuntary service would be sanctioned are in scenarios in which we would sanction today, i.e. debt, POWs, and criminals. So to be an involuntary servant seems to be the case that you would, any person would be an involuntary servant, would be based on debt if they're a prisoner of war or if they're a criminal. Then the conclusion is, therefore, biblical slavery, when defining the word slavery as we would today, does not exist. So biblical slavery in his mind, based on this conclusion, is not slavery as we would define it today. Biblical slavery is just voluntary and involuntary servants. That seems to be how that argument's working. And then very important here at the bottom, and forgive me if I meander, I'm really gotten rusty at doing these kind of videos, and a lot of times when it comes to Jill conversations, my heart's just not in it. But so I'm going to try to keep this as succinct as possible, I hope. So then he has down here the footnote. The challenge for the skeptic, therefore, would be to prove the involuntary servitude of a person in scenarios in which we would not confine or enforce servitude onto another involuntarily today. right? So all you have to do is you have to show in the Bible where something is happening in the Bible that basically comports to how we understand slavery today. Essentially, this is almost the same as what he used to do years ago, where he used to demand that in order to prove biblical slavery, you had to, or quote unquote, biblical slavery, the Bible or endorsing or condoning or sanctioning slavery, was to show examples in the Bible of like antebellum South slavery, North Atlantic slave trade, that kind of thing, right? Those are the two primary things, right? If you can show an example of something in the Bible where it's like antebellum slavery, where they took people they kidnapped people, chained them, put them on ships, shipped them to places, and those people were beaten and lived in harsh conditions and all this kind of stuff, then he would concede. Now you have slavery being endorsed in the Bible, at least under this law code, right? Through Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. And I'll just let this continue for a little bit, and then I'll let you know how to defeat it.
In the house. All right. So the argument, premise one. The Hebrews used the word slavery to denote.
Oh, just a spoiler alert, or just a spoiler, but it's not really that much of a spoiler. We never really get past premise one here, because when I heard this premise, and that's the thing, I had seen this biblical slavery challenge before, but I didn't remember it. The way that P1 is worded, premise one is worded, is just weird to me. But once you think about it, it just seems to be what he's essentially saying is that the term slavery for Hebrews just meant servants of either voluntary or involuntary status.
Both voluntary, meaning service, that work that I would do because I wanted to do that work, because I wanted to make money, because I wanted to survive even.
Okay. There's a problem there. He just said to make money. That's another issue, but we'll get to that later.
So this would be voluntary work. The same word, aved, was used to describe that type of designation, and also
not to make money. But like I said, we'll get into that later.
The same word, aved, was used to describe those who were involuntarily
A Cygnus Justus.
serving. True or false?
Yeah, that argument doesn't follow.
The argument doesn't follow. Is that true or false?
Yeah, it's true that it would be true that it doesn't follow. I shouldn't have actually even said that, because here's the thing. At the time that I made that claim, I don't know if I could actually show how the argument doesn't follow logically, but here's the problem. You could grant that this is a valid argument. It doesn't make it a sound argument.
I don't
the same word. They use the word aved. The word aved means two things. It could mean those who are working.
Well, essentially, in his position, an aved is just someone who is a servant, regardless of status. So aved is just a servant, regardless of status. Whether they got there involuntarily or they voluntarily do it, both are servants. So aved just means servant. In his based on what he's saying here in premise one, and that's probably why I was having a problem with premise one, because also based on what he said was to make money, right? You're an eved if you're a servant because you voluntarily want to work to make money, whatever. there's a problem there.
Because they want to work and they want to make money. And it can also mean those who are working because they are being forced to work.
But you're missing the fact that, but no, that's false, because in Leviticus 25, the distinction is made that a Hebrew servant is not to be an Eved.
And that's my first mistake. Well, actually, that's my second mistake. My first mistake was claiming that doesn't follow because I wouldn't know how to demonstrate at the time. So Jill could have challenged me on that. Well, show me how the argument doesn't follow, how it's a non sequitur. And number two, now I'm saying a Hebrew quote unquote slave could not be considered an Eved. That's not true either. That's not correct. And I'll get into that here in a little bit.
Whether they're called, a Hebrew servant is not to be an Eved? Where does it say
an Eved, yeah, Hebrews, the fellow Israelites who went into indentured servitude, they were not to be treated as Eveds.
Okay.
That's the distinction right there. That's what I should have said originally. They're not to be treated as Eveds. They are they're what's referred to as Eved. So a Hebrew servant or Hebrew slave would be an Eved of Re. So in Exodus 21 and in Deuteronomy, and even I think in Leviticus 25, they would be an Eved of Re. They would be a Hebrew slave. The treatment of them could not be as an Eved. And I'll show you what I mean here. I'm not gonna switch to you can look this up. This is Leviticus 25, which is where we find the most popular set of verses that's used, which is Leviticus 25, 44 through 46. Those aren't the verses that I'm going to be using. It starts in verse 39 of Leviticus 25. And this is NRSVUE translation. If any who are dependent on you become so impoverished that they sell themselves to you. And what this is in relation to, in Leviticus 25, this is referring to, at this particular point, Israelites and Israelites, right? And earlier in Leviticus 25, it's talking about like levels of like destitution that a fellow Israelite might get into, right? And how they can go about, how fellow Israelites can help them, right? But verse 39 gets to a point to where it's like, if a fellow Israelite gets to this really impoverished position, they can sell themselves to you. You shall not make them serve as slaves. They shall remain with you. And now there's distinctions between Leviticus 25, Exodus 21, and even there's some differences even in Deuteronomy as well. And Deuteronomy is considered by scholars to be kind of a reworking of Exodus. But in Leviticus 25, there's definitely a difference here. The condition of an Israelite as being the slave of another Israelite, and even later on in this same chapter, being the slave, if they sell themselves to a sojourner, a foreigner who's living among, somebody who's a resident alien living amongst the Israelites, that same condition had to apply. So this condition had to apply to an Israelite selling himself to a fellow Israelite, or an Israelite selling himself to a sojourner living amongst the Israelites, a resident alien. They shall remain with you as hired or bound laborers. They shall serve with you until the year of Jubilee. Then they and their children with them shall go out from your authority. They shall go back to their own family and return to their ancestral property. For they are my servants, whom I brought out of the land of Egypt. They shall not be sold as Eveds are, or in this case, slaves are sold. You shall not rule over them with harshness, but shall fear your God. Now, when you look up, since we're using the term Eved, and Jill already basically stated that a servant is someone who works for voluntarily will work for like money, right? That there is a Hebrew word that is used for a hired worker, and it is not eved. It is a sahir. So when it says they are not, so the way this is stated is they are not to be treated as eveds. They are to be treated, you could kind of like rephrase this. They're not to be considered as eveds or treated as eveds. They are to be treated as hired workers or bonded laborers. So they are eveds in the sense that they're indentured, they have sold themselves to another Israelite or to a rich sojourner, but their treatment cannot be as an eved is. Their treatment has to be as a hired worker, as a sahir. It doesn't mean they're getting paid. It just means the way that they are treated is as a hired worker. Like it says later on, they are not to be treated harshly. You're not to rule over them harshly. I hope I made that clear. Hi, Crimson. Jill is bothering me again, and I just don't understand why he wants to taste me so much. That's kind of interesting. I am going to do this real quick. I want to look up. Sorry, I don't have this ready. I had this ready to go on my other computer, but just bear with me here real quick. There it is. Let me see if I can do. Oops, that wasn't the right one. No, that didn't work. Oh, in the heck? Why is that not working? I was going to read something from Dr. Josh's book that addresses this, but I'll go back to it. Hold on one second, folks. I got to step away just for a minute. Damian Levchuk. Yes, Damien Lovechuck says Leviticus 25:45. You may also buy some of the temporary residents living among you and members of their clans born in your country, and they will become your property. Yes, that one's pretty obvious. But like I said in the description of this video, you do not actually have to use Leviticus 25:44 through 46 to defeat the biblical slavery challenge that Jill is pointing out here. I'll be right back. I'm back. Sorry about that. Take care of something because, just got home. Sometimes you get to take care of the pets.
They were to be
not
given the same
treated
considerations.
as events, not to be treated as event, but the word event.
Yeah. So Jill's not to be treated as a ved, but the word.
Listen to what I'm asking you. The word itself could mean both situations. It can mean someone who is forced, someone who is there against their will. It can also mean, I could also say, hey, that's an eved for someone who is working as a maid or a servant.
Now that's kind of weird how he said they're working as a maid or a servant. According to P1, an eved is just a servant. You don't even, at this point, you don't even need the involuntary or voluntary status to apply. Or I should say, well, not the status. The involuntary, the voluntary would be the conditions by which the person is a servant. So their status is that they're a servant. The conditions by which they became a servant are either of a voluntary nature, or they're either of a voluntary nature or an involuntary nature. Either way, eved can just be used as a servant, to just mean a servant. Yeah, it can be, if you really want to. But normally in the context of the verses that we read, it's not that simple. It's not as simple as just saying, yeah, there's someone who chose to go to work or chose to get a job to make money. Because according to Leviticus 25, the hired laborer is not considered an eved; it's considered a sechir.
No, not necessarily.
True?
It depends on the context by which the narrative is written.
Of course it does. I'm asking you, is that a possibility?
Yeah, and this is stupid because he's saying, is it a possibility? Yeah, it's a possibility. You could use the term eved to just colloquially mean a dog or use it as a euphemism, right? So, right, oh, I'm your slave or I'm your eved. So, yeah, you could use it for all sorts of, you could use the term for whatever. Possibly. So I should have just granted it and said, yeah, go ahead. We'll do that.
In this case, when you're talking about a worker, so eved
Let me
normally
show you the Greek. Let me just show you the.
And this is my other mistake. I'm trying to explain things. It's a mistake to try to explain things to Joe. Don't explain things to Joe. The best thing to do is just trap him. Is just to ask questions, find out things about what it is that, listen very carefully to what he's saying, think up pertinent questions, ask him those questions, and keep going. Basically resort to a Socratic method, and then basically drive him into a corner to where he can't get out. Don't explain anything. Do not try to out-explain him on this topic at all. First of all, he's not going to understand. People have tried, and it never catches to him. His dogmatism is so rank, he cannot get out of this. His brain just cannot fathom the idea that for some reason in the Old Testament there is his God basically telling Moses to tell the people of Israel, at least in some of these narratives, yeah, you can have slaves. That's not what God's telling them. He's just telling them that people can work or they can not work, or they can be workers or they can be involuntary workers. Is essentially what he's trying to is what he's insinuating, especially with premise 1. Yes, Michael Friedman brings up a good point. Never attack Jill, never defend your position. Or always attack Jill, never defend your position. Yes, attack with questions. Always attack with questions. This was my biggest mistake. You do not want to you want to play as stupid as possible. Have that information loaded in your head, and when you have the conversation, just ask him pointed questions, and you can trap him. And you can get him to a point to where he will explain his way, especially if your memory's good. He will find a way to explain his way right out of a position that he that he previously gave before. Yeah, Jill is not still a thing, Hive Science. I'm making a huge exception by even doing this video. I said a long time ago I wasn't going to cover any of his stuff. The only reason I'm really kind of making this an exception is because I made the mistake of going in on his live stream and trying to talk to him. Big fucking mistake.
Agree, since you want to play games.
So here's where in my opinion, my mistakes have actually led to an interesting, to him to have to do something that's very interesting. So here's the thing. If I had just said, sure, it's possibly you can use the term servant or you can use the term Evid to just mean servant. Sure. Right. Then I don't know if this would have actually come up. So maybe the mistake worked. The mistake on my part worked to bring this out.
You don't have to show me the Greek.
I'll show you the Greek since you want to play games. The word Eved can mean actually 4 different things. Here I'm just giving you 2. It can mean someone who is there voluntarily. They want to be there. They want to work. And it can also mean someone who is there against their will.
So an Evid is just a servant who's there either involuntarily or voluntary. But what does it mean to actually be a servant? To him, a servant is just someone who is in some service, some way, shape, or form. They're a voluntary servant. They're working for money. Or they're volunteering to work for nothing. But an involuntary servant, well, that's somebody who's, like in premise 2, it's because they owe a debt. It's because of POWs, or they're POW, or they're a criminal.
Same word, Eved, could be used in either case, true or false.
But that's not the context in which Leviticus 25 is putting it.
And this is a mistake on my part because I kept referring to Leviticus 25 and the context of Leviticus 25, and there's problems with Jill. So I was trying to jump to just Leviticus 25. And what I really should have just done is just played this game. Because this game right here, this particular biblical slavery challenge, to defeat it, you don't even have to go to Leviticus 25. Morning.
Not talking about Leviticus 25.
Yes, we are, because those are specifically.
That was another mistake. No, we're not. I'm trying to get us to Leviticus 25, but he doesn't want to go to Leviticus 25. He just wants to to play the semantic game, right? And I should have just played it. Sure, go right ahead. Evid just means servant. I'll concede to you. Evid just means servant. And then he would have probably been like, no, Evid doesn't just mean servant. It means a servant that's either an involuntary servant or a voluntary servant. Okay. Is there any other kind of servant? Is there any other condition that applies to someone being a servant other than voluntary or involuntary? And if he went, no, okay, then we can just basically say Evid means servant. Or Evid is another way of saying servant. Or it can be used to indicate a servant. Right? And there's a nuanced distinction there. The term it can be used to indicate a servant doesn't mean that it's always used to indicate a servant.
The word be used in both instances. Would I be correct if I were to call both Eveds? If I were to say, hey,
you're
Eved
not going to escape
and hey,
by doing that.
over here.
They're not both Eveds. They're just Eveds. They're both Eveds.
Would that be correct?
No.
According to the text. All right.
By doing that, you're ignoring the context of Leviticus 25.
Let's show the Greek. We're not talking about context, and I'm not talking about Leviticus 25.
Which is interesting because to him, the context of the context in order for the condition of involuntary to apply to a servant is under the conditions of debt, POWs, and criminals, according to P2. That's context. In order to, so if you go, okay, what conditions are necessary for someone to be of an involuntary servant status? Now we get into the context of debt, POWs, and criminals, according to premise 2. So his premise 2 is literally the context for the involuntary servant part. So at this particular point, P1 is just, it's just the term Eved is, the word Eved is servant. And it's interesting too, because the Hebrews used quote unquote slavery to denote both voluntary and involuntary servants. But that's, slavery is not the thing, is not the servants. It's not a grouping of servants. Slavery is the system by which, or the sets of conditions in which a person becomes enslaved and becomes, and is now a slave. So to him, slavery, so based on P1, slavery is the conditions by which a person can either volunteer to be a servant, or they can be a debt, they can owe debt, be a POW or criminal, and then they're an involuntary. Now they are an involuntary servant. That's slavery, according to the Hebrews.
I didn't say what passage.
Are we tracking?
You could use that word.
Can the word
Joe,
be used?
I don't have a problem with the word just being used as unpaid worker.
Mm-hmm.
He can't even agree to what the Greek says. So let me
Jill,
show you what the Greek says.
I just said I don't even have a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, Michael Friedrichsen says Jill is just shoehorning voluntary, involuntary. Yes, I agree. Is the third option of servant called a wife? Funny.
Problem with the word just.
See, and so here, and the reason I'm bringing this up, the thing about the worker part, because what I say is I don't even have a problem with the term Eved being defined as, because I think it was a conversation that we had over on Brojo's channel. This was a long time ago, where there was a Hebrew dictionary that was used, and Eved just very rudimentarily meant unpaid worker. So what I'm saying here is, I'll just grant you that Eved, for the most part, the best way to define the word Eved is just an unpaid worker. That's not entirely true either.
Being used as unpaid worker.
Where's my Greek?
Did you not hear me?
So you agree with premise 1? Premise 1 is true. Premise 1 is true then.
No, because the term.
Okay, well then
no, premise true is not. Premise 2 is not, or premise true. Premise 1 is not true, because he hasn't demonstrated that the Hebrews used. Remember, his question is, can the word Eved be used to denote an involuntary servant or a voluntary servant? But that's not what P1 is saying. P1 is saying that the Hebrews used some term that relates to slavery to basically indicate servants, either of a voluntary status or an involuntary, or of either under voluntary conditions or involuntary conditions. He has not shown that the Hebrews' only concept of slavery, when they were referring to slavery, was that. So no, P1 is not true. It can't be true, and here's why it can't be true. Because how did the Hebrews refer to their slavery when they were slaves in Egypt. If it's the case that the Hebrews used some term, quote unquote, that's akin to slavery to denote that a person is either an involuntary servant or a voluntary servant, but the Hebrews, according to the Bible, were slaves in Egypt, how does that work? What was the term that they used for this condition, the conditions that they were under while they were in Egypt, according to Exodus, that aren't slavery? Because to them, slavery just means to be an to them, slavery just means to be an aved, and aved is just another way of saying servant. So now he's got a problem. He now has to reconcile with why was it bad that the Hebrews, the Israelites, were slaves in Egypt? What did they call that? What was their word that they used for being slaves in Egypt, where Moses had to come around and had to basically convince the Pharaoh to set his people free? If they were just voluntarily there in Egypt to work, then it should follow that they can just stop working for Egypt and leave Egypt. But if it's the case that they're involuntary servants to Egypt, what was it that got them into the condition of being involuntary servants? And according to them, according to what Jill is saying, it must have been because they were either in debt to Egypt, or they were POWs, or they were criminals. Because he started this with premise one, that the Hebrews used quote unquote slavery to denote this. I brought this up to him before in a conversation that we were having on a comment thread. He did not answer it. Am I tracking? Please let me know if what I'm talking about doesn't seem to be tracking.
I have to show you the Greek then. All right. So, hey, how's it going, Brett? I'll.
This is funny because he says he's going to show me the Greek. He doesn't actually show me the Greek. He shows me a very rudimentary, kind of like a lexicon.
While I'm looking that up, Brett Keene, how's it going, brother?
And the Greek is listed. There's ancient Hebrew, and then there's Greek down below. But
that's going pretty
involuntary.
good. I don't know. Are you able to hear me? I just set up my new mic.
Yeah, we hear you.
If you don't mind, I looked in Leviticus, and it clearly talks about indentured servitude and people selling themselves in order to.
Well, it doesn't just talk about indentured servitude. It also talks about chattel slavery. There's two types of slavery that are indicated in Leviticus 25. There's indentured servitude or debt slavery, as we understand it today, which is if an impoverished Israelite sells himself to another Israelite, that's debt slavery. And then later on in Leviticus 25, 44 through 44 verses 44 through 46, there is chattel slavery. If you want a male or a female slave, right? Someone that you can actually treat as an aved, right? That's not a fellow Israelite. You can purchase them from the nations around you. You can purchase them from the sojourners that live amongst you, the resident aliens.
Pay out their debts.
Right.
What exactly part of Leviticus are you reading, sir?
It seems like Brett's it sounded like Brett was coming in at my defense, but it's not. It really isn't.
Well, that's what I was trying to explain, at the word of ved. So let me show him. All right, since he wants to deny premise one and play game.
Yeah, I can deny premise one until I'm blue in the face. It really doesn't matter, because he hasn't actually given his explanation that he seems to be implying is simply that premise one, the explanation for premise one is the Hebrews used the term eved to mean servants.
Because
Okay, so let me show.
Or to denote servants.
because it's kind of an equivocation, because I don't have a problem with the term aved being used as an unpaid worker. The thing is that in Leviticus 25, it refers to certain unpaid workers.
We're not talking about Leviticus 25. We'll get to Leviticus 25 when we get there. Right now, I am showing you a lexicon, okay, about the meaning, the possible usage. We'll figure out whether
I
or not.
already
Yes, the possible usage. So, can the term eved be used to denote a servant? Well, according to this, the way he has this written up is funny because he's got Hebrew Old Testament and he has eved, and I guess he's got the actual letters there, the actual word there written in ancient Hebrew, and then he's got meaning, and he's got 1, 2, 3. Now, earlier in this conversation, if you remember, he said there were two definitions. The term eved has two definitions. It can mean involuntary servant or a voluntary servant. Now we're at 3. Well, and then later on, I think later on he did say there was 4. Now we're at 3. So which one is it? Is it 2, 3, 4? Who cares, right? But keep going.
can see. I
Hold on,
already
hold on,
just
my
told
guy. You're
you.
cutting off. This isn't Hillary's channel anymore, dummy. So shut up.
So now, so if you notice, now he's resorted to the insults. He does not like to be challenged. So I walk away. I give him a minute.
Bye.
Okay, shut up, or you'll be put backstage. I didn't ask you about Leviticus. When we get to Leviticus, we will determine, based on the context, whether or not it is referring to a bondservant, the word aved, or slave, or servant. I asked you a very simple question.
Yes. So now there's the problem. So those aren't meanings. Those are usages. So the term eved can be used to denote a slave. What does it mean to be a slave? The term eved can be used to denote a servant. What does it mean to be a servant? The word eved can be used to denote a bondservant. Now, what does it mean to be a bondservant? So slave, servant, and bondservant are not the meanings of eved. They're the way that he's talking, the way that he's been structuring this is that eved can be used to denote a slave, a servant, or a bondservant, right? And then he just said it, the context will determine the meaning.
Premise 1, and I'm surprised you don't know this. This is why you fail my biblical slavery challenge every time. You show
I don't even know how I failed it every time. I never really took it.
your ignorance. You show your ass. And then you go on Hillary's and act like you actually defeated my argument. No, you haven't.
Now there's something very interesting here. I thought this was very interesting. Let me take that back a little bit.
So shut up.
Bye.
Okay, shut up, or you'll be put backstage. I didn't ask you about Leviticus. When we get to Leviticus, we will determine, based on the context, whether or not it is referring to a bondservant, the word aved, or slave, or servant.
1 second, folks. I'm back.
I asked you a very simple question. Premise one, and I'm surprised you don't know this. This is why you fail my biblical slavery challenge every time. You show your ignorance, you show your ass, and then you go on Hillary's and act like you actually defeated my argument. No, you haven't.
So I don't know who he's referring to, but I have, as far as I can remember, I have never gone on Jill's channel and repeatedly tried his biblical slavery challenge and then turned around and showed my ass, and then went over to Hillary's channel. He's referring to Hillary's emails, gone over there, and then declared that I won. I honestly think, because later on he refers to me as Will Freeman. I honestly think that he's confusing me with William Freeman right now. I think Jill might be getting a little touch of the dementia here.
You can't even get past premise one.
Yeah, sometimes that can happen. I don't have to grant you premise one. Especially if you don't really have an explanation for premise one. And the way of explaining premise one is to ask me whether or not I would agree that it's possible to use the term evid. The term evid can be used to denote a servant. That's not an explanation for premise one.
It's common knowledge. You can ask any scholar. They will.
That's not common knowledge. If you have to ask a scholar, it's not common knowledge, Joe. That's bizarre.
Tell you the word aved.
Now, bear in mind, he's ranting right now. He doesn't even realize that I said bye and walked away.
Has several meanings. Here are three of them.
No, that would be several usages, not meanings. The usages aren't necessarily the meanings. What the term is being used in, basically to say, I can use this term, right? I can use the term dog to refer to beagle, pit bull, right? Poodle, dachshund, right? That doesn't really. So at this point, you're just talking about a general term for just a servant. Is it the case that evid, based on premise one, you're saying that evid, it seems to be that evid, or the condition of slavery, the condition of being an evid, is being an involuntary or voluntary servant. Because you already put it in premise one that the way the Hebrews use the term slavery would be to denote that someone is either voluntary or involuntary servants. If someone is under the condition of slavery, the whatever way the Hebrews use the word slavery, that makes them evids, that makes them servants. That seems to be how that gets reduced. But again, it forces the issue, okay, how do you now reconcile what the Hebrews were and what they called themselves when they were slaves in Egypt? They couldn't have been slaves, right? They were held against their will, right?
Them. Slave, what we would call a slave today. Servant, that's a voluntary worker. It's not someone who's forced or someone we would consider a voluntary worker today. Three of them. Slave, what we would call a slave today.
So what he's saying is the term evid can be used slave. So now he's giving the meanings. How we would use the term slave today, right? So what is the condition by which, or what is the system by which a person becomes a slave, and what is that called? Is it slavery? Because you just said Hebrew, according to premise one, Hebrews used the term, some term that's equal, quote unquote, equal to slavery to denote just servants. We understand it today that in order to be a slave, a person falls under a system of slavery. In some way, shape, or some way, the person or persons have been enslaved. That's what slavery is. Slavery is the method by which people become slaves. It's the system. It's the setup. But your premise one was just, well, the system of their idea of a system of slavery was just you're a servant, whether voluntarily or involuntarily. So he's already refuted his premise one by saying they can use Eved to be referred to slave, and now he's saying it's just like we would refer to it today.
Okay. Servant.
Servant.
That's a voluntary worker.
That's a voluntary worker, but it's not necessarily a hired worker, because the term for a hired worker isn't Eved. It's Sakir.
It's not someone who's forced or someone we would consider a slave even today. And also a bond servant, someone who owes a debt and is in debt and has to pay off the debt by working.
No, now he stated that very clumsily. A bond servant isn't just someone who has to. So technically, I could have debt and still be a servant, right? According to him, I'm voluntarily working, right? And as I voluntarily work, as this is according to Jill, I'm a servant. He just said, earlier in this, he said a servant can be just someone who just voluntarily works, whether they make money or they're just working as, they could even just be working charitably or whatever, right? Working without pay of their own volition, right? So I can work and make money and still be in debt, right? But the way he defined bondservant is somebody who has to work because they're in debt. That's kind of vague. That's not what bondservant means. Technically, I would still, I can't, so I would be like, well, I have to continue working my job as a voluntary servant because I do have debts. So I need to stay at my job in order to pay my debts and to still support myself.
Okay. So any one of the three could have been called an Aved in the ancient Near East. True or false?
Well, I'm listening to you, Jill, and you've been
Oh,
on
he
point
ran.
and
He
everything.
ran. He ran.
So now he stretched it. Originally, he asked me, could Aved be used to refer to an involuntary servant or a voluntary servant? And I went, no. Now he stretched it out to, can the term Aved be used to refer to a slave, as we define it today, a servant, someone who's just voluntarily working, or a bondservant, someone who has to work to pay off their debt, or someone who's in debt that has to work to pay it off? I think that's how we put it. See how this is why it's pointless to talk to Joe. He can't even keep his own shit straight. He has moved his own goal. He has moved his goalpost on his own. The goalpost was originally to get me to concede whether or not can Evid be used to denote these two, to indicate these two things. Now he's asking me, can the term Evid be used to indicate these three things?
Yeah, I know this.
Now he's gonna go on his channel and say that he defeated my argument, sir. You can't even.
No, here's the thing. I never would have. And I'm not even saying how. I can't even admit that I defeated his argument here. I'm doing this to show people how to do it and showing them my mistakes when I had this conversation with them. I completely bungled this up at the very beginning. This was a complete fuck up on my part.
Even get past premise one. Oh gosh, Beckel, I hope you could clip that one, Beckel. Clip that one. Man, clip that one.
Clip what one?
Amazing.
You know, another thing that people miss too, Jill, is whenever
this is fucking rich. This is fucking awesome.
They talk about like foreign slaves due to wars and all that, but the Bible says you're not allowed to kidnap people. But if you do find yourself in a war or whatever, then you can take people and assimilate them into the society. But all the other stuff,
you didn't necessarily have to assimilate them into the society to have them as spoils of war, Brett.
He said's absolutely right. I mean, I even posted the verses over in the private chat.
He probably, yes, you can kidnap people. Let me just take a little bit of time here to correct Brett on something here. Yes, so it's in, let's see. Here it is. The people had compassion on Benjamin because the Lord had made a breach in the tribe of Israel. So the elders of the congregation said, what shall we do for wives for those who are left, since there are no women left in the tribe of Benjamin? And they said, there must be heirs for their survivors of Benjamin, in order that a tribe may not be blotted out from Israel. Yet we cannot give any of our daughters to them as wives. For the Israelites had sworn, cursed be anyone who gives a wife to Benjamin. So they said, look, the yearly festival of the Lord is taking place at Shiloh, which is north of Bethel, on the east of the highway that goes up from Bethel to Shechem and south of Lebona. And they instructed the Benjamites, saying, go and lie in wait in the vineyards and watch when the young women of Shiloh come out and dance in the dances. Then come out of the vineyards, and each of you carry off a wife for himself from the young women of Shiloh and go to the land of Benjamin. Then if the fathers of their brothers come to complain to us, we will say to them, be generous and allow us to have them, because we did not capture in battle a wife for each man, but neither you incur guilt by giving your daughters to them. The Benjamites did so. They took wives for each of them from the dancers whom they abducted, and they went and returned to their territory and rebuilt their towns and lived in them. So the Israelites departed from there, and at the time by tribes of families, and they went out from there in their own territories. So in this particular, in Judges, this is supposedly the way a lot of people think of the Bible, is narratively after, right? It's taking place after the old law is set up. So what Brett is referring to is you can't kidnap a person, right? Anybody caught kidnapping a man, it refers to men. An Israelite can't kidnap another Israelite man. It does not say they cannot kidnap women or children. And in this case, in Judges, the tribe members of the tribe of Benjamin went out and kidnapped women to take as wives.
Oh, thank you for that. Yeah, let me see what you have over here. Thank you for that, Brett. I was
Well, I don't know
I
what
was
time it is
just-
for you right now, but it's about 3 in the morning for me. I figure
yeah.
it's not different for you.
Oh yeah, me too. Yeah, I'm getting ready to close it down. That's really all I wanted to see. I'm only going to keep up the part where this coward came in and tried to take the biblical slavery challenge and couldn't get past premise one. What every scholar
You wouldn't let me get back. Yeah, I left. You wouldn't let me say anything, so you wanted to just ramble on. But you'll see, because apparently you're still a coward if you go in and try to take up the challenge. Even if you fuck it up, you're still a coward.
has already confirmed to be true. Oh, he's back. He's back. So now I guess he lost connection. Did you lose your connection, Jay
No,
Pascal?
I figured I just needed to walk away since you were going to resort to name calling.
Okay. Well, you might as well
May
just
I ask you a question though, Jill? It's a serious one, and
Yeah.
it's something I don't understand.
And here comes the other retarded question from Brett King.
Why is it that when non-believers and religious folks get into discussions about this, they're talking about ancient stuff, but they don't talk about modern day slavery where Muslims have enslaved people, that there's over 50 million people in slavery in Somalia, Nigeria, the Middle East, and all that. How come nobody ever brings that up? I never hear one feminist cry
they're
about
cowards. They're cowards.
Yeah, that's the stupidest thing. I've heard people use that. So let me just give you an example. Let's say a group of people are having a conversation. They got together and they watched the movie Platoon. And the purpose of watching the term Platoon, the movie Platoon, was to then discuss things about the movie that possibly portray some of the atrocities or the events that occurred during the Vietnam War. And then and so that's the topic of discussion. And then someone over in the corner goes, well, I don't understand why we're going to talk about that when we could be talking about when we've got this current war going on in Iran. Right. So imagine like the ditzy blonde or something, just kind of using this as a way to not engage in the topic of discussion, but just trying to like, well, I mean, this is pointless because I mean, right now there's a war going on in Iran and I don't see anybody talking about that. Well, because that's not the topic of discussion, you dumb twat. That's literally the answer that you give them. And that's essentially what Brett Keane has just done. Well, why aren't they discussing these modern examples of slavery that are going on today? Because that's not the discussion. The topic is whether or not the Bible endorses slavery, not whether or not there is slavery still happening today. That's a different conversation, Brett.
Brett, simply put, they're cowards. Okay, they go along to get along.
No, it's not even about cowardice. What Brett is bringing up is the stupidest thing that a person can ask if you already have a set topic of discussion. So no scholar should ever engage themselves in any kind of like work when it comes to discern or looking at the narratives in the Bible and saying, do these narratives seem to based on the way they're written seem to make it so that this God or seem to kind of portray this God as endorsing certain types of slavery? They sure do. Well, do you really want to get into that discussion? Because we've got problems with our own kind of slavery today. Fuck off.
Christianity, Christ is their enemy.
They're two different. That's two different topics.
So they all have a common enemy. They will team up. Muslims will team up with liberals. We see that now. Okay, they will team up when they are going against Christ or who they think is Christ's representative. Just in this case, the Jewish people. All right. So, do you see what's on the screen, William Freeman or William Freeman? I'm calling him William Freeman.
See, he called me William Freeman. Because remember earlier he had said, Well, this is the guy who's come in here and showed his ass trying to do this, failed at this biblical challenge, shows his ass, and then goes to Hillary's emails channel and starts, bragging to them about how he won. That wasn't me. So I think all of a sudden he had like this weird brain fart and was thinking that I was actually William Freeman and decided to just throw that out there.
William Freeman has adopted his dumb argument that he fails every single time.
William Freeman has adopted his dumb argument. I don't even know what that means. Adopted whose dumb argument? My dumb argument or his own dumb argument? What do you mean?
Time he comes on this channel, he fails to demonstrate his argument, and he's doing it once.
Well, the argument would be a way of trying to demonstrate. Argumentation is a form of demonstration.
Again, Jay Pasick, do you see what's on the screen?
Yeah.
Okay. How many different definitions, how many meanings or usages?
Yeah, those are not meanings. Those are usages. Those aren't meanings.
Can there be for the word "abet"? Can you count?
Well, it looks like you can have slave, servant, and bondservant. So what do those three mean? What do those three mean?
Great. We'll get to the context of each verse to figure out what they mean in context. Great. So premise one, once again, let me put up the biblical slavery challenge. Once again, the Hebrews, the word slavery could denote in the Hebrew culture both a servant and a slave, what we would call a slave, someone who is working.
See how he fucked that up? Remember, so he just said it again, or he just said this.
Could denote in the Hebrew culture both a servant and a slave. What we would call a slave, someone who is working against their will.
Is that what he asked before? So an involuntary servant is a slave? The person that owes debt, the person that's a POW, and the criminal are slaves, is what we know them today? But again, this isn't how you defeat the biblical challenge. This is just him. I think this is just him fucking up his own language, right? Again, he asked, can the term Eved be used to denote an involuntary servant or a voluntary servant? Yes or no? But that's not what P1 is stating. P1 is not asking that question. P1 is making the claim that the Hebrews used some kind of term for slavery that meant that that certain individuals were either servants, were either voluntary servants or involuntary servants. So now that kind of begs the question, like I said before, how do you now reconcile that with what the Hebrews were supposed to be in while they were supposedly slaves in Egypt? Were they just involuntary servants? Were they voluntary servants? But now he said, can it be used to denote a voluntary servant or an involuntary or a slave, which we would call an involuntary servant? He's fucking up all over the place.
True or false?
And what I should have said is false based on what you've said before. Because now you're saying it's a slave, not an involuntary servant. Because you actually stated earlier that a slave, but I wasn't there for that because I had walked away. So I didn't actually hear him, or was I there for that? I'm starting to lose track. But when he uses that term slave, oh yeah, he did. So the term slave is they understood slave as they do today, as we do today. I can go back to it.
In this case, the Jewish people. All right. So do you see what's on the screen, William Freeman? Or William Freeman? I'm calling him William Freeman. William Freeman has adopted his dumb argument fails to demonstrate. Do you see what's on the screens? Excuse me. How
Well, it looks
the
like
context of each. So premise one, once again,
Nope, that's not it.
Jay Pasick. Do you see what's on the screen? William Freeman has representatives, just in case Muslims will team up with liberals.
Feminist,
Free scholar over here.
you're not.
Oh gosh, could have been called an event. Has to pay off the debt. One who owes, we would consider a slave even today, and also it's not someone who's spent. That's a voluntary worker. Okay, three of them. Ved Hallige.
Yes. So I wasn't here. I wasn't here for when he gave this.
You can ask any scholar. They will tell you the word aved has several meanings. Here are three of them. Slave, what we would call a slave today.
So what we would call a slave today. So he has to be careful of this, because now he's saying that what we would refer to as a slave today, they would also refer to a slave. Remember, the term eved, as it's being used by Hebrews, can be used to denote slave, servant, or bondservant. So what does slave mean? Slave, as we understand what slave would mean today. But in premise one, slavery, quote unquote, just denotes servants.
In of itself, and we didn't even
here.
Both.
Okay, let me go back to this again.
Let me put up the
There we go.
biblical slavery challenge. Once again, the Hebrews, the word slavery could denote in the Hebrew culture both a servant and a slave, what we would call a slave, someone who is working against their will.
So he just fucked that up. Is a slave someone who necessarily works against their will? Yes or no? No. You don't have to actually work against your will to be considered a slave. I could give Jill examples. The concept of property is what you're dealing with when it comes to slavery. On that note, you know what I'm going to do? I am going to do this real quick. I'm going to pause for I'm already paused for a minute. I've got to go use the bathroom. I'm going to open this up. I'm going to copy this in here because this is almost done. And then I'm going to let some people in here if they've got questions or anything. And then I will reveal the quick way of defeating Jill's biblical slavery. And then what I'll do is I'll do another video where I just do a quick summation and say, this is how you defeat this stupid biblical slavery challenge. And I see Math Pig is here. He's one of my favorite people. Him and I haven't talked in a while. Doubting Thomas, good friend of mine since I've been on here. Him and I have had some fantastic conversations with believers and even some non-believers. It's been fun. So here's the link for anybody who wants to join. If you're at work, I understand completely time change, time differences and all that shit. But I'm going to put my headset down. I'm going to take just a quick minute. People come in, just give me a minute and I'll come back when I see it. If I see it in the back. We don't have debt slavery today. Yes, Alan, but unfortunately, good luck explaining that to Joe. He doesn't fucking get that shit. Really doesn't get it. And it's good to see you as well. I like Kurt. He's interesting to talked to, and I've enjoyed some of his conversations with theists over on Taco's channel. All right. I see Math Pig is in the back. I'm not going to put you up just yet. Like I said, I'm going to go take a break real quick. Like I said, nature's calling in a big way. Hello, hello. Doesn't seem to be on. There it goes. Okay. Wasn't sure if my mic was working. I wasn't seeing it highlight. Got a text or got thing. Yep. Danny Time says, can't join at the moment. That's fine. What do you think of Alex O'Connor? Heard of the guy, or what do you think about? I don't. If you're asking me, Damien, I don't have. I like some of. I don't agree with him on everything, but I like some of his stuff. Especially enjoyed his debate with Dinesh D'Souza. That was hilarious. Alan says Jeebus' Lord just has very confused positions about how slavery was constructed in the ancient world. Probably hasn't read Aristotle on this. He hasn't read a lot of stuff, I don't think, Kurt. He's kind of a dipshit, even though he claims to be a teacher. Hey, Matt Big.
Hello, is it working?
It's working. Boy, you sound like
I'm on the phone.
You sound like you're in a car.
Yeah, totally in a car. Yeah. Just finished work, heading home. You said you hadn't spoken in ages, so I thought I'd jump on and say hello.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it gives me a chance for a smoke. I can stand up. I don't have the iron ass that I used to for live streams.
I'm literally on my last 2 papers, and I'm trying to stick them together to get a fucking joint after the day I had, and it's like surgery here. It's fucking awful.
Oh, okay.
I'll get more when I get to the shop, but I want to fucking smoke now. Just the dickhead I have to work with is unbelievable.
Is he
You would have a field day with him, Jay. He checks his QAnon drops in the morning. He thinks that Joe Biden's a clone, and the entire cabal of the world this weekend is going to do something.
Oh, okay. Well, does he also think he has ghosts in his underpants?
He's just insane. Like, the things that comes out of his mouth. Like, I asked him today, how does he discern truth? And he kept avoiding the question. And when I eventually pushed him on it, he was like, common sense tells you, and I know it because I believe it. It's like, dude, that's not like.
So if he believes that he has 15 fingers total, then it's true that he has 15 fingers.
He told me today earlier, just as we were leaving, that he's under the belief that diamonds don't take as long to create, and that's why they've started hoarding them, and that's why diamonds are, so expensive. I'm like, no, it was a company in capitalism. They did it with the wedding thing, but no, moving on. And like, I can tell you on average how long it takes to make a diamond. And he was like, right. So I whipped out the phone and I went to Google Scholar, and he goes, oh, you're checking Google. I goes, no, I'm checking Google Scholar to look up a scientific paper to see the research on it. And he was like, the algorithm, mainstream media will just tell you what you want to believe, man. I'm like, right, no point in talking to you, like, go away.
Yeah. He thinks he's onto something unique by being QAnon.
Oh, he knew about Jeffrey Epstein before everybody else. Like, jeez, yeah. Worse than Jill, but I'm sure you're just having fun with Jill.
Well, no, it's never fun with Jill. There's never any fun with Jill. Like I said, like I said at the beginning of this stream, I fucked up multiple times at the beginning of this. You never try to explain things to Jill. You just question until you corner him.
Yeah, but that's something along the lines that I want. He started going on about a cure for cancer and how they won't bring out a cure for cancer that they already have because they make more money in the pharmaceutical industry treating a disease. And I was like, what is cancer? And he was like, well, you tell me. I was like, no. I'm asking you, dude, what is cancer? And why do we not have one single cure for cancer? Well, my wife had cancer. I was like, cool. What is cancer? Like, he just couldn't tell me that. I don't know. Stupid people.
So his wife had cancer, but he doesn't know what cancer is. So he
had cancer of whatever it was, but yes, he doesn't know the actual. My point that I was trying to get to him was the reason why there's not one single cure for cancer is the same as there's no reason for one single jab for all of cold and flu. They're different diseases.
Well, you know what you should have asked him. Well, I got a question for you. Because Jill has said this before, that as a Christian, according to him, he's never had a bad day in his life. According to him, no Christian will ever have a bad day in their life. So is his wife not a true? So, well, now you have to ask yourself, is being told you have cancer a bad day in your life? Not only for the person being diagnosed, but also possibly for you, since you're married to your wife. Isn't that a bad thing? A bad day in your life?
Yeah. Well, this guy's not a Christian. Like, he's just fucking stupid.
So, yeah. I'm not gonna.
I work with a lot of Christians. My direct production manager is a Calvinist, and he is way smarter than this guy. Like,
oh, those damn Reformed. Oh.
Right. I'm officially moving now, so I might sound different and I might cut out, but
you still sound fine. Still sound the same.
The next time you are talking to Jill, you wouldn't ask him a favor from me, would you?
I'm not going to ask him. I'm not going to tell him that you said. Oh, now you cut out. Yep, you're still cutting out.
I'm here.
There we go. There we go. Now you're back. So what do you want me to ask Joe? Ah, damn it. You're still roboting. These damn international calls, I tell you. Yeah, you're still roboting. If you can hear me. I might be roboting on your end too, because if your connection's sketchy. I want to wait to see if he.
Hello. All right, change.
Nope. Still connection.
Networks does not work.
It was a little better. Now it's just gone complete. Meow.
I made that noise. No.
Now you're clear. Now you're clear. Just don't move. Just stay where. Still roboting, man. Still roboting. This is the best part of the stream right here. This is the most exciting thing. I hate doing. God, people wonder, oh, you really do. People say, yeah, you really do good content, Jay. And I'm like, I fucking hate doing live streams. Sometimes I hate doing. It doesn't even have to be a live stream, since I just hate doing the shit. It's like sometimes it's enjoyable, and then other times, and I'll be, all right, I'll do it. I'll get on here, and it's like, oh, damn, I gotta keep all this shit straight. I gotta remember everything from Dr. Josh's 2 editions of Did the Old Testament Endorse Slavery? Yeah, hundreds of years before any Christian was questioning slavery, I hope I have this pronunciation, Philodemus, I think, or Philodemus. I think it'd be Philodemus. Could be Philodemus, but either way, called it inherent, unnatural, and immoral. Yeah, you didn't. Well, and that's the thing. The term, the real issue. Okay, so he had to drop out, or either that or his connection finally dropped. That's fine. He might be back. Oh yeah, I tried. He wrote, I tried. Yeah. If you can come back, Matt Peg, that's cool. If you can get better signal. And I'll just go ahead and get back to this. That way I'm not leaving people in suspense, because I've already been on for an hour and a half and I haven't even gotten to the conclusion or to the solution to solving the biblical slavery challenge. But we're close. We're close, people. So let's get there. Let's go ahead and get there. I could have got there probably an hour ago, but I wanted to build some suspense.
True or false?
I don't agree with the
So okay.
wording of that, because it sounds like what you're doing here.
All right, Breck.
And there was my final mistake. I was going to go into an explanation. Again, don't do that.
Keen, thanks for joining me.
So what happened there was he kicked me. And then I was like, oh, did he kick me or did I actually drop? And then when I tried to join, he had me blocked. So I couldn't go back in. That's fine. So before I continue with commentary on this, Which there's stuff in this between him and Brett Keane that's also I've gone a little bit further, but I don't have to. So let's take a look at this. Let's look at this biblical slavery challenge one more time in its entirety. Premise 1: the Hebrews used slavery to denote both involuntary and involuntary servants. P2: the only scenarios in which involuntary service would be sanctioned are in scenarios in which we would sanction today, i.e., debt, POWs, and criminals. So again, based on what he said on P1 just recently, it doesn't sound like we would accept that because that would be slavery. But now he's saying, but P2 says it would be okay. Therefore, biblical slavery, when defining the word slavery as we would today, does not exist. The challenge for the skeptic, therefore, would be to prove the involuntary servitude of a person or persons, I'm adding persons, in scenarios in which we would not confine or enforce servitude onto another involuntarily today. So, here we go. This is how you defeat it very quickly using one biblical passage. All right. Can everybody see that? I'm going to zoom in. And this is 2 Kings 4. NRSVUE. Now the wife of a member of the company of prophets cried to Elisha, "Your servant, my husband, is dead." Now Elisha is the prophet after Elisha is the prophet after Elijah. This is obviously after Moses. So this is 2 Kings. This is narratively, it seems to be, would probably follow after the establishment of the Old Testament laws. "My husband is dead, and you know that your servant feared the Lord, but a creditor has come to take my 2 children as slaves." Elisha said to her, "What shall I do for you? Tell me, what do you have in the house?" She answered, "Your servant has nothing in the house except a jar of oil." He said, "Go outside, borrow vessels from all your neighbors, empty vessels, and not just a few. Then go in, shut the door behind you and your children, and start pouring into all these vessels. When each is full, set it aside." Now, this is very interesting. She is going, I'll get into this. I'll get into that part later. And anyway, so she left him and shut the door behind her and her children. And her children, they kept bringing vessels to her, and she kept pouring. When the vessels were full, she said to her son, "Bring me another vessel." But he said to her, "There are no more." Then the oil stopped flowing. She came and told the man of God, and he said, "Go sell the oil and pay your debts, and you and your children can live on the rest." So we kind of almost have like a loaves and a fish's tail here, right? She has one jar of oil. Then she collects, it says here, he tells her to go and outside and borrow vessels from all of your neighbors, empty vessels, and not just a few. Then go in, shut the door behind you and your children, and start pouring into all these vessels, which each is full. When each is full, set it aside. So she left him and shut the door behind her and her children. They kept bringing vessels to her, and she kept pouring. Now, here's the interesting thing about this narrative. First of all, is that particular part. You're borrowing empty vessels from someone to pour this, seems to be now never-ending bottle of oil. And now you're selling it. Are you transferring? So now we have to ask ourselves, is she selling the oil in the vessels that she borrowed? Or are these people, or is she selling the oil, but people have to bring their own vessels so that she can pour that oil into their empty vessels so that she can give back the vessels that she had borrowed from other people? We could argue that till, there's no way of really even knowing, right? Either way, there's a problem here. a creditor has come to take my 2 children as slaves. So what Jill would have us believe, or have us, what this is saying is, they are coming to take her children and make them Eveds. Now, does this mean that they're actually worth something monetarily in and of themselves, that they can be used as almost like collateral on a debt? Or is it the case that the creditor is coming to force them to work to pay off their father's debt? Where are you up to?
Planting some flowers and putting some grass seed down over there.
On the other side of the fence? Oh, okay.
They never fixed it. They were supposed to come back and fix it, not us, because that's where they put the tubing in.
Okay. So I saw my wife putting on shoes, and I'm like, where are you going? What are you doing?
Nothing.
So there seems to be this ability in this society, according to this narrative, where a creditor, based on her husband, the widow's dead husband, having owed debt to this creditor, the creditor can come and take her 2 children as slaves. And this is something that she does not want. Right? And the only way that she can get out, the only way that she can solve this, that she can stop this from happening, is to, obviously, this miracle takes place where she can sell oil, make enough money to pay off the debt so that her children do not become slaves. Now, what does it mean for these 2 children to be slaves? Does it mean that they have collateral value, that they can be almost traded off as like a commodity, where they have, or like some kind of property, where a human being, children have like a set price value to them, and they can be sold and basically or them as property can be used in lieu of monies? Or is it the case that the children are going to be taken and forced to be debt slaves, indentured, right? They're going to be indentured servant. They're going to be indentured servants. Now, this doesn't mean they didn't. Is it their debt? No, it clearly states that it's their father's debt, their dead father's debt. So now, if they are debt slaves, and Jill has already said that when we were having this discussion, that slave, right, when he was showing that little goofy, little simplistic lexicon, that slave means what we mean by slave today, there's a problem with that. Because guess what's considered a slave today? What is considered a form of slavery even today? Debt slavery. Which is also the very part of his second premise. You could be an involuntary servant just like you are today. And I think he even states, well, they can throw your butt in jail. Really? They can. And I think he says the IRS, but she's like assuming tax debt. So that's the fastest way that you can defeat his biblical challenge. And if he argues, that doesn't defeat my biblical challenge. All you have to do, because this was something that I had no knowledge of until he appealed to it years ago, probably a few years ago. Jill brought up the 1926 Slavery Convention, Geneva Slavery Convention, and then there's also the 1956 supplement, right? So the 1926 supplement, or the 1926 Slavery Convention, which is the first one, defines slavery as this. This is slavery. This is how slavery is defined in the Slavery Convention. Slavery is the status or condition of a person over whom any or all of the powers attaching to the right of ownership are exercised. So that's slavery, right? So sometimes, so in this article, it doesn't give slavery just this as the slave system, right? It's the overarching category, right? It's the status or condition. It's a status or condition in which a person or persons over whom any or all of the powers attaching to the right of ownership are exercised. So some person can be the property of some other person or persons, right? Then it includes the slave trade. The slave trade includes all acts involved in the quote, in the capture, the acquisition, or disposal of a person with intent to reduce him to slavery. All acts involved in the acquisition of a slave with a view to selling or exchanging him. All acts of disposal by sale or exchange of a slave acquired with a view to being sold or exchanged, and in general, every act of trade or transport in slaves. And a slave, right, is someone who falls under the condition of being a slave. Someone who has is someone who a slave is someone where someone else has rights of ownership over them. Either now, Dr. Josh in his book, Did the Old Testament Endorse Slavery? Gives a good one. I'm going to try to see if I can. There it is. In his book, in the second edition of his book, and I think this is the definition that he used in his first edition as well. He writes, perhaps a good working definition for our purposes might be, and this is for slavery. Okay, so here we go. Let me go up. Defining slavery in the ancient Near East, which includes the Old Testament, is not a straightforward or simple task. The words in these ancient languages that we translate slave can have nuanced meanings, depending on the context in which the terms are used. However, when we narrow our scope, we discover that there are essential characteristics of slavery that can be identified in the various contexts. Within the context of slavery in the legal passages, Dendemaev defines it in this way. Slavery is the institution whereby one person can hold ownership rights over another. So, very similar to the definition that's given in the 1926 Slavery Convention, right? Dr. Josh continues, perhaps a good working definition for our purposes might be a condition in which an individual or rights to their labor is owned by another either temporarily or permanently. The owner controls and is legally allowed to derive benefit from the actions and activities of the owned individual. We will see that there were different types of slavery described in the Hebrew Bible, and we will attempt to further specify this more general definition when discussing these types. Now, there's a second thing that you can use. If he doesn't like 2 Kings 4, we will go to, you can go right here to Exodus 21. Also, kids were pretty cheap back then. How many jars of Wesson would it take to purchase the child today? I don't know. Actually, I don't know. I mean, what would be the real question is what's the going rate for a Hebrew child versus a non-Hebrew child? And does it matter? Does it actually matter? So now I'm going to share this tab. Now remember, he says Jill had already stated earlier, slave is as he said, Eved, and then he had these words that the other usages, the slave, servant, bondservant, right? Okay. Slave, he said, is how we understand it today. Okay. Where's my tab at? Here we go. We're going to go right down here to chapter 7, or right here to verse 7. When a man sells his daughter as a slave, she shall not go out as the male slaves do. If she does not please her master, who designated her for himself, then he shall let her be redeemed. He shall have no right to sell her to a foreign people, since he has dealt unfairly with her. If he designates her for his son, he shall deal with her as with a daughter. If he takes another wife to himself, he shall not diminish the food, clothing, or marital rights of the first wife. And if he does not do these things for her, she shall go out without debt, without payment or money. So she gets there's nothing paid out. She just goes out. Poop. Done. What does that sound like to you? Well, let's go back to that supplementary convention again. Each of the states parties to this convention shall take all practicable and necessary legislative and other measures to bring about progressively and as soon as possible the complete abolishment of abandonment of the following institutions and practices, where they still exist and whether or not they are covered by the definition of slavery contained in Article 1 of the Slavery Convention, signed the Slavery Convention signed at Geneva on 25 September 1926. So this is the 1956 supplement. And of course, it's referencing back to the 1926 one, which again, it's still going off the same definition of what it is for slavery and slave trade and what it is to be a slave. Debt bondage. That is to say, the status or condition arising from a pledge by a debtor of his personal service or those of a person under his control as a security for a debt. If the value of those services is reasonably assessed, is not applied towards the liquidation of the debt or the length and nature of those services are not respectively limited and defined. So debt bondage, slavery. What did Jill say in his biblical challenge was an acceptable form of involuntary servitude? Of being an involuntary servant? Debt. Now, serfdom. That is to say, the condition or status of a tenant who is by law, custom, or agreement bound to live and labor in the land belonging to another person and to render some determinate service to such other person, whether to reward or not, and is not free to change his status. And that's B. But here's the important one where it comes to Exodus 21, verses 7 onward, when it deals with the daughter. Any institution or practice whereby a woman without the right to refuse is promised or given in marriage on payment of a consideration in money or in kind to her parents, guardian, family, or any other person or group, or the husband of a woman, his family, or his clan has the right to transfer her to another person for value received or otherwise, or a woman on the death of her husband is liable to be inherited by another person. Any institution or practice where a child or young person under the age of 18 years is delivered by either or both of his natural parents or by his guardian to another person, whether for reward or not, with a view to the exploitation of the child or young person or of his labor. Guess what that covers too? 2 Kings 4. So according to how we understand slavery, what it means for slavery to apply today, to be a slave today, the Slavery Convention, the supplement written in 1956, adopted I think in 1957. Entry into force 30 April 1957 is basically saying what's being depicted in Exodus 21:7, starting in verse 7, is slavery. And 2 Kings 4 is slavery. So whether or not those children are being used to work off a debt, even if they were voluntarily handed over by her to do so, and they're under the age of 18, that is slavery. That is how you defeat Jill's biblical slavery challenge. Because that dipshit, let me go back and show it again. The only scenarios in which involuntary service would be sanctioned are in scenarios in which we would sanction today. Debt, POWs, and criminals. He done fucked up. We don't do involuntary servitude for debt. Involuntary debt servitude is debt slavery. This is in violation of the 1956 supplement. Forcing people to work against their will to pay off debt, and especially using your kids to either if you were to hand your kids over voluntarily, or if in the case of 2 Kings 4, they are going to be forcibly taken as collateral in repayment of a debt, is fucking slavery. And in 2 Kings 4, Elisha never says, well, this is just wrong. They can't do that. What does he do? He basically has the woman perform a miracle where she can get a ludicrous amount of oil from a small container of oil in order to sell that oil off in order to basically satisfy the creditor so that the creditor does not take her children as fucking evids, slaves. Because Jill fucked himself over by saying slavery is a condition by which a person or persons are simply voluntary or involuntary servants. Not slaves, voluntary and involuntary servants. Now, there's another issue here as well. Some people think that in order to be a slave, yep, John Fabiano says, word, what up, Jay? Hey, everybody. Matt Pig, Thomas. Yep, nice to see you, John. A lot of people think that in order for slavery to be slavery, there has to be an enforcement of work. So let me give you an example of something. My car can do work for me, right? I buy my car. I own my car outright. Is my car my property whether I drive it or not? Yep. So is it possible that a person could be a slave, be the property of someone else, and not have to work? Does Exodus 21 say that the wife that is sold to pay off the debt has to work? Or is she just the man's slave wife, quote unquote? Doesn't seem to say so. And here's the interesting way, the way that you can think about this. And I think some believers think that this is what's happening in Exodus 21. There's a guy, he owes some guy money. And the guy that he owes money to goes, I want you to pay off your debt. And the guy that owes him money goes, look, I don't have the money to pay you off, but I do have a daughter. And the guy goes, okay, give me your daughter and we'll count that towards either the entirety of your debt or to some portion of your debt. Right? Like it's a 1-to-1 agreement. Nah, I don't think that's necessarily how it works. I think it can work like this. The father, person A, owes person B some money. That person B is the creditor of person A. And person B wants money. Person A, the father in this case, he's the debtor. He's falling behind on his payments to person B. Person B says, I want my fucking money. So now person A, the father, goes, shit. I got to find a way to get some money to satisfy my debt to my creditor, who's person B. Here comes person C. And person C says, you know what? I can help you out. I'll take your daughter for this amount of money. And the father, person 1, or person A goes, sorry, messed up. Person A goes, deal. Person C pays person A for their daughter. Then person A uses those monies to satisfy his debt to person B. It's not necessarily 1-to-1. The father is literally using his daughter as a commodity, or it's like a commodity. It would be like, when all else fails, I sell you my car. Or I'll give you this. Take this, give me a certain amount of money, I take that, and I go pay this. But in this case, he's using his daughter to satisfy a debt. And in the case of 2 Kings 4, somewhere along the line, there seems to be this ability for the creditors or the creditor in 2 Kings 4 to go, well, my debt, the loan or whatever monies that I owed this woman's dead husband have not been paid back to me. I now have the right to claim her children as collateral on the debt owed. So there's two things that now can happen. She either has to find a way to come up with the monies to pay off the debt, or to at least satisfy a portion of the debt, or to possibly get some kind of maybe, well, okay, I'll take this amount of debt and then you have so much time to pay the rest of it off kind of thing. Or I let him take the kids. Well, I don't let him take the kids. He's going to take the kids regardless, because she's in the narrative. She's pleading with Elisha. She needs help with this. The creditor is going to take her kids, her 2 children, away as slaves. So again, This is why Jill needs to read and understand Dr. Josh's book. Now, he doesn't have to get the second edition. He should get the first edition because it's a little bit of an easier read. Second edition's meatier. But I don't think he would understand it either. He says he's read it. Can involuntary servitude not be slavery? Sure. In the case of that's the other problem with the equivocation. Not all involuntary servitude is necessarily slavery. That's from Damien. That's why I use those other examples. Right? Community service is a form of involuntary service. It's almost like being an involuntary servanthood, right? Does that mean you're a slave? Does that mean that you're the property of someone? No. That's the real trick to slavery. The point of slave, like the definitions that I read, based on not only they're right there, I read two definitions given in Dr. Josh's book, and I gave the definitions in the 1926 Slavery Convention. It's about property. It's about rights of ownership. Whether or not you own the person and their work, or you own their work, whatever. Rights to their labor, whatever the case might be. Now, could the argument be made that community service is a form of slavery? You might be able to. But here's the thing. Our law, which is it? The 14th Amendment? Which this has been argued. Is the 14th or 15th? That might be the 15th Amendment. Which one is it? Yeah. Nope. Which one is it? Somebody help me out. There's an amendment that allows forced slavery to be used as punishment for a crime. "13th Amendment. That's the one. It abolishes slavery except as slavery being used for a crime. So if you want to say, well, of course, the involuntary servitude when it comes to community service is slavery. According to the 13th Amendment, if that qualifies as slavery, the 13th Amendment says that slavery can be used as punishment for a crime. For a crime. Did the woman in 2 Kings 4, did she commit a crime? Did the children commit a crime? Let's ask this question. If the husband committed a crime and would have been forced to do some kind of involuntary servitude and then dies, he owes a debt to the state or to the government. Would it be just for the state to come in and then force the children, or even the children and the widow, to do the involuntary service, the community service, in lieu of the dead husband? Jill isn't interested in understanding anything, unfortunately. I agree. It's so hard for people to get the whole not owning people thing. Yes. Thank you, Kurt. They don't understand that it doesn't even have to be about it. It has nothing. It doesn't have to be about labor. Jill used to use the argument all the time that it's about you gotta kidnap someone and then force them to work against their will. That's what slavery is. And since there's that verse in Exodus that says, well, you can't it's also in Deuteronomy too, that you can't kidnap someone, right? So you can't have slavery. And a lot of apologists have tried to use that. That's not what that means at all. First of all, it means you can't kidnap a fellow Israelite man. It doesn't say anything about not kidnapping a woman or children or men from other nations. But the other example that he gives is the POW one. The other example that he gives is POWs as indentured servants, or basically being involuntary servants. That one's fucking hilarious because he seems to think that a POW can be a non-combatant or a combatant. Prisoners of war are normally considered the combatants. The non-combatants are not prisoners of war. And in the Geneva Convention, which Jill likes to argue, but Jill never actually, in the Geneva Conventions that in regards to war are the way that war is to be carried out, the rules of war, Jill's never really understood the difference between combatants and non-combatants. And just because the non-combatants are doing some kind of cleanup or being used as labor in order to do, like, let's say, rebuilding, cleaning up bodies, cleaning up battlefields, stuff like that, that's not to say that they're even property. Nope. What's that? Force a habit so the wind doesn't blow it open. Sometimes it pops open. Well, sorry. It's just force habit.
Just a heads up, there are lots of spider webs, so you're gonna want to spray soon if we're not hiring.
Okay, well, we're supposed to get rain again either later today and tomorrow. So
20% for an hour.
well, but if it's going to rain more tomorrow, you still don't want it. It has to sit for 2 days without rain.
I'm just telling you.
Yeah.
It's about that time.
Sorry, the wife throwing me a honeydew. All right. Let's listen to a little bit.
Thanks for joining.
No problem, man.
I'll see you next time. Are you going to be doing any streams late or what?
Let me see, what is today? It's Monday. I might do something on Wednesday and Friday, maybe.
Okay.
It's been a while, dude. I get kind of tired of people just running in, yelling. I mean, if they'd stick around at least for 10 minutes so you could smack them around like you do, then that'd be a little bit more fun. But they just scream, names and then run.
Yeah, they like to hit and run on your channel and do other things. But, so you got to be careful on these.
Well, I guess you're going to get some sleep.
Yeah, I'm gonna call it a night. That's all I really wanted to see these guys just fail over and over and over again, over and over.
Yeah, what he's referring to by guys is he's referring to his exchange with individuals on Hillary's emails channel. That's what he's referring to there by the guys, not me. Again, I came in after all that.
Over and over again, just fail. And we didn't even get to his failure. His major failure was in the fact that he now is trying to convince people using the argument that because people were purchased, that in of itself proves slavery.
Yeah. If you can buy a person as property, if you can purchase someone as property, then yes, that would make them a slave.
Well, I mean, in the sense of the Bible, it's really no different than the extreme modern day slavery, but we
It's no different than the extreme modern day. It's no.
also have the way the economy's set up. People are bought every day to work a job and employment.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a weird way of putting that. He says, listen to how Brett put that, how he started that.
In the sense of the Bible, it's really no different than the extreme modern day slavery.
So, in the sense of the Bible, it's no different than the extreme modern day slavery.
But we also have the way the economy's
But we also have the
set
way
up.
the economy.
People are bought every day to work a job and employment.
Exactly.
So, I mean, this isn't the
and Jill is agreeing to this. Jill just agreed to that. He just agreed with what Brett said when Brett said the Bible is no different than the extreme versions of slavery that we have today. I'll take it back.
Guys just fail over and over and over again, over and over and over again, just fail. And we didn't even get to the, his failure. His major failure was in the fact that he now is trying to convince people using the argument that because people were purchased, that in of itself proves slavery.
That's not really a argument, but it is. But you could dice it down. You could take the claim and possibly break it down into an argument. If it is the case that a person can buy another person, can purchase another person, is it the case that by purchasing that person, it renders that person the other person's property? If that person is now the property of the other person, is that person that is now property a slave? I'm just giving it as there's a question mark there. Would that follow? Would that argument follow? What examples do we have of purchasing people? Like purchasing a person as a commodity or as some item, like landed property. Like I can buy Kurt, like I can buy a car.
Well, I mean, in the sense of the Bible, it's really no different than the extreme modern day slavery, but we also have the way the economy's set up. People are bought every day to work a job. And
so Brett is all over the place here. He says that it's no different than some of the extreme. It's no different from today's extremes of slavery. But then there are people who are bought today. Well, what do you mean by bought? You mean they agree to work for a certain amount of money? They have a contract. Are you referring to the NFL contract or the NBA contract? Where I will pay you $5 million if you play basketball for my team. And you can't leave ever until you fulfill $5 million worth of basketball playing.
employment.
Exactly.
So, I mean, this isn't the
employment is not slavery. And to equivocate that, and that's the other thing. Jill didn't even say, Jill said that Evid could be used to infer or be used as a way of saying someone is employed. He didn't say it's necessarily employment. He said, is it possible for me to use the term Evid to refer to like, oh, that maid is working. There's a maid working, or there's someone's working as a maid, or someone's working as a servant. He said that earlier. What makes you think that a slave needs to be working? Where is the condition by which a slave must necessarily work in order to be considered the property of someone else? Where are you getting that from?
kind of stuff you'd see in Roots or whatever, where people are tied to trees and whipped on and all that.
No, you don't need those conditions for the concept of property to be applied to other human being and thus make them slaves. Brett? Slavery doesn't mean not only is the person quote unquote bought, but they're whipped, they're scored, they're just treated like a quote unquote, they got to be treated as a slave to be a slave. No. Anyone who makes that argument is wrong. Would I say that what's being depicted in Roots is slavery? Yes. Does that mean, does all of that which is depicted in Roots need to occur in order for someone to be a slave? No. Again, if I buy, let's say Kurt's got a daughter and he's in debt to someone and he goes, "Hey, Jay, I'm in debt up to my ass. You want to buy my daughter? So I got some money to pay off this asshole who I owe money to. Sure, I'll buy your daughter. Do I have to make his daughter work? No. Do I have to make her have sex with me? Actually, no. Do I have rights of ownership over her? Yes, I fucking do. Does she get to go out? Can she just leave anytime she fucking feels like it? Can she go, you know what? This ain't for me. I'm putting in my 2 weeks notice. No, she fucking cannot. I bought you. You're mine. But like it says in Exodus 21, there's conditions. There's certain conditions that apply. And there's nothing saying that I can't release my slaves. Nothing says that I can't release my slaves. The only part in the Bible that states that you have to release a slave is when it comes to an Eved Ivri, a Hebrew slave. And that is in Exodus. That's in Exodus and Deuteronomy. That's on the 7th year in Exodus and in Deuteronomy on the 7th year. Exodus says that a female does not get to go out on the 7th year like the males do. However, Deuteronomy changes it where a female Hebrew servant slave would go out on the 7th year. And Leviticus 25, there is no 7th year release. It's a 50th year release. But the conditions are different. Right? And in Deuteronomy, when you release a slave on the 7th year, you give them provisions so that they don't fall back into destitution. That's not found in Exodus 21. Just remember that also when you're having that conversation about Leviticus 25, Exodus 21, and I'm blanking on the chapter. It's like 21, 22, 23, wherever it's at in here. Let me find it real quick. Deuteronomy 15. Not 21. It's Deuteronomy 15.
That horrible stuff. This
Right.
is definitely different than modern day.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's
You didn't say that it was different than modern. Wait, what are you talking about, Brett?
point I made in debate with Dr. Josh, that purchasing and buying and being acquisar is the Greek word for acquisition. It just simply means that you made a
No.
deal. You made a bar.
That's not. He's not even using that correctly. Let me repeat that one more time in case people missed it.
The trees and whipped iron and all that horrible stuff. This
Right.
is definitely different than modern.
Josh, that purchasing and buying and being Acquisar is the Greek word for acquisition. It just simply means that you made a deal. Acquisar is the Greek word for acquisition.
Okay. Acquisar is the Greek word. Looks like there's many, but they're not pronounced acquisar. I think he's confusing that with acquizah, which isn't a Greek word. It's a Hebrew word. And the Hebrew word acquizah is a noun. The term I believe for buying is kana in ancient Hebrew. So to buy something is kana, and what you buy can be considered your akuzah, your property, your landed property. Let me go back to no, there's too many. Where was that at? Trying to find it. Yeah, here it is. So property. Before we leave Leviticus 25, 44 through 46, we should discuss some of the other Hebrew terms that are used in these verses. Let's begin with the word property, ahuzah. So not ahuzah. In various discussions, the presentations on social media, many have argued that this term does not indicate that a person is owned, but simply refers to the labor output of an individual. If correct, this interpretation would soften the tone of the passage, leaving the master merely owning the work or labor of the slave, rather than their personhood. As we saw above, slaves were commonly bought and sold just as they are in this passage. Does this purchasing therefore simply refer to the buying and or selling of labor output? The word ahuzah appears many times in Leviticus 25, most exclusively referring to the portions of land that were allotted to the Israelites. It's also used in passages like Genesis 47:11, where Joseph gives his family an ahuzah in Egypt. So Joseph settled his father and his brothers in Egypt and gave them landed property, ahuzah, as part of the land and in the land of Ramesses, just as Pharaoh commanded. The noun ahuzah can also be joined with other words to specify the type of property that is being spoken of, as in Genesis 23:20. And the field and the cave in it were deeded to Abraham as burial land, ahuzah and kever, grave, by the Hittites. While the word is normally used to refer to land or objects that are owned, it is striking that the word ahuzah is used in Leviticus 25:45 through 46 to refer to purchased slaves. Indeed, Milgram notes, this is the one place where this term is applied to persons. Canaanite slaves, like Israel's land, are permanent possessions, thus in the same way that objects can be considered property. So also can slaves. Levine observes, in ancient law, slaves were often regarded as having legal status parallel to that of land, just as the land was a holding, ahuzah, to be handed down within families, so were slaves. Nevertheless, some have turned to the verses that follow this passage to demonstrate the term property, or the term property should be equated to with labor output. Leviticus 25:47 through 55 reads, and if a sojourner or tenant foreigner with you becomes wealthy, and your brother with you becomes poor, and sells himself to the sojourner or tenant foreigner with you, or to a descendant of the family of a sojourner, after he sells himself, redemption will be available to him. One of his brothers may redeem him, or his uncle, or his cousin may redeem him, or one of his kin from his family may redeem him, or if he gains the means, he may redeem himself. And he will calculate with his purchaser. From the year of his sale until the year of Jubilee will be the price of his sale according to the number of years, like the days of a hired worker, he will be with him. If there are still many years, according to them, he will repay his redemption from the money of his purchase. But if a few years remain until the year of Jubilee, then he will calculate with him according to his years, he will repay his redemption price. Like a yearly hired worker, he will be with him. He may not rule over him with violence in your sight. But if he cannot be redeemed in these ways, then he will go out in these ways, then he will go out in the year of Jubilee, the 50th year. He and his children with him. For to me are the sons of Israel slaves. My slaves are they, whom I brought out from the land of Egypt. I am your God. Leviticus 25:47-55. The situation presented in this passage involves an Israelite that sells himself to a foreign resident at the time of their redemption, either by a kinsman or by himself, using his own accumulated wealth. He should determine the correct redemption price by calculating the length of time that he would have served until the Jubilee. What is significant here, however, is that the text is describing how an Israelite is to be viewed and treated, not a foreigner. Not only is the word ahuzad not used in this section to refer to the Hebrew slave, but it is not even mentioned at all. Remember, the contrast in the passage is between how an Israelite who sells himself into slavery is to be treated compared to how a foreigner may be treated. One of the central points is that the Israelite cannot be treated as a slave and must be released at the Jubilee. The foreigner, on the other hand, need not be released and may be treated as a slave. That is where achuzah is used, is with the foreign slaves. Another distinction that Jill and Praise muddy all the fucking time.
It just simply means that you made a deal. You made a bargain, or you bartered with someone. You made a contract with someone to work for a wage, or
But Jill, that's a one-on-one agreement where you go, well, I agree to work for you, blah, blah, blah. And you pay me certain monies, or I work for you for free and blah, blah, blah. But that's not the fucking case in 2 Kings 4. And that's not the fucking case in Exodus 21 verses starting at verse 7 with the fucking daughter that is sold to someone to pay off a fucking debt. You ignorant wretch. What the fuck is your problem?
even for food, or even for a wife, like in the story of Joseph and Laban, right? Remember that
Give me a
story?
break.
Yeah.
Boy,
You know,
that
you
Rachel,
could
that
you
Rachel,
could use the argument that the atheist dictators actually enslaved their society.
Yes, Brett, you could use that argument, could you? Would that make it fucking, would that be right? So are the atheist dictators basically acting in accordance with God?
By using the government against folks to get them to do what they want under control. I mean, if you wanted to, you could actually argue that.
Getting people to do what they want under certain control is not the same thing as a person being another person's fucking property, Brett. It doesn't follow that if I use certain ways of getting people to do what I want, I'm manipulating them through some kind of force, that I have fucking property rights on them. You ignorant shit. Think before you fucking talk.
well, yeah, I mean, someone like Snake, Snake, right? Snake was right. I think was his name. He's more like a leftist. He would argue that all governments are
This, first of all, the Snake is right is not a leftist.
forms of slavery. So he would argue that the Bible does condone slavery because the Bible had governments. So yeah, if you're going to be that broad in range semantically with that word slavery, then yes, then everyone is a slave, right? Because everyone is under some sort of authority. So that's why premise 2 sort of tries to deal with that. The only scenarios in which slavery would be sanctioned would be in scenarios that slavery is sanctioned today. So today, if you're in debt.
But that's not what you said. Slavery is just servanthood, not slavery. Being an involuntary servant isn't necessarily being the prophet of. So essentially what you're doing is equivocating and saying that even today we allow for a certain kind of slavery, which is debt, POW, and criminals. We don't in the case of debt. We don't in the case of POWs. The 13th Amendment allows slavery to be a punishment for criminals, to be used as a punishment for criminals, but that's been argued over many, many years. But POWs don't belong to anyone. No one has rights of ownership over POWs. Again, Jill is equivocating on this forced labor aspect of this is how we get to slavery. Forced working. No. You can be a slave and never fucking forced to work. I can buy some guys, like I used before. I buy Kurt's daughter as my bride so he can get out of debt with his creditor. And you know what I have his daughter do? She's really good looking. I just have her hang around in my house butt ass naked. Does she get to leave whenever she wants? Does she get to say, this ain't for me? Nope. Is she working? Define work. If she's laying around if she's just basically hanging around in my house butt ass naked because that's the way I prefer to see her. Is she a slave? Not according to Jill. My property doesn't have to work for me in order for it to be my fucking property. My car doesn't have to run for it to be my car. I don't have to drive my car for my car to be my car. My car is my car because I have rights of ownership over it. If somebody steals it, I get to get money back. I can seek out ways to get restitution for that car. Now, if somebody goes, well, that's not the case. That's not the case with people, Jay. That's not even in the Bible. Really? You want to bet? Laws concerning property. When an ox gores a man or a woman to death, the ox shall be stoned, and its flesh shall not be eaten. But the owner of the ox shall not be liable. If the ox has been accustomed to gore in the past, and its owner has been warned but did not restrain it, and it kills a man or a woman, the ox shall be stoned, and its owner shall be put to death. If a ransom is imposed on the owner, then the owner shall pay whatever is imposed to the redemption of the victim's life. If it gores a boy or a girl, the owner shall be dealt with according to this same rule. If the ox gores a male or female slave, the owner shall pay to the slave owner 30 shekels of silver, and the ox shall be stoned. So what is the going rate of the value of a male or female slave? 30 shekels of silver. I lost property to your property. Pay me money so I can go replace it. Chris says, I guess you couldn't give Wesson for that one. No, you couldn't. Not in Exodus 21. No.
The IRS can lock your butt up. If you are a POW,
the IRS cannot lock you up unless you're committing some kind of fraud. And debt slavery, it has nothing. It's interesting that he goes to debt slavery. When he hears debt, he goes to the IRS. Are you telling us something? Do you got tax debt there, Jill? Because not all debt is in the form of tax debt.
You will be detained, even if you are a survivor of war. You would still be detained. Not
You could be sequestered in a certain area, but not necessarily.
just for the safety of the soldiers. One of you could be rogue and throw a grenade and blow everybody up, and so you still have to detain those individuals, even though they're not combatants. Okay, but also for their sake.
Non-combatants aren't POWs, Joe. The non-combatants are not considered POWs. They're just the non-combatants.
So that they're not left out in the wilderness or left out for barbarians to now come and ravage the women and children that are left behind. So in those cases, and criminals, of course, criminals you put in jail, they are slaves, they are wards of the state. So in those cases, even today,
you just made it. They're wards of the state. They're not property of the state. They're wards of the state. The state has a custodial right. Do you know what the state can do to all of them? They can let them go. They don't have any property value. The state can't sell them for anything.
You will be a quote unquote slave. Someone will be over you if it's a war scenario, and there are people, we call that occupied, right? We say that this place is occupied by the U.S. For a specific time, whatever, right? And those
well, it's not always an occupying force. It's also liberate. They also refer to it as liberated. So if Germany was occupying parts of France and U.S. came in, did we occupy France or did we liberate France? Jill. And as we went through Germany, as we went from Normandy, of the beaches of Normandy, working our way through France, going towards Germany, were we taking the non-combatants and sequestering them and making them work against their will? Were we taking French citizens and making them work? Yes or no? You idiot.
individuals are usually kept in camps, right? They're fed, they're not mistreated.
Really? The French citizens, as we moved from, I'm just using World War II because he likes to use World War II. The French that were there, that were occupied by Germany, as when we landed on the beaches of Normandy, did we put them in camps? Or are you referring to the citizens of the enemy country once we defeated that country? Because I'd like to let you know that when it comes to World War II, it was Russia that initially dealt the fucking kind of the blow that caused Germany to finally surrender. And when it came to the German people, we did not put them in fucking camps. I don't know of any accounts from World War II where we put German citizens, German non-combatants, in fucking camps.
Okay, but
unless I'm wrong, can somebody correct me?
They are.
I mean, I watched Band of Brothers. I don't remember watching the show and watching them putting fucking citizens in the goddamn. Well, that's a TV show, so it may not be accurate. Yeah, Jeebus' Lord is missing the idea that prior prisoner exchanges prove that in modern warfare, there are not any quote unquote owned slaves. Good point.
Quote unquote.
But again, he doesn't think that slaves are, that there's ownership involved in slaves. Remember, he thinks that by me using this position of if a person is purchased, then they're owned, therefore they're a slave. Jill doesn't believe that, Kurt. He thinks it's perfectly fine if he's used this example before. If he tells Veckel that he wants to that Veckel can purchase him, he's fine with it. They're just going to write up a list of duties that Jill is agreeing to do on behalf of Veckel. So that makes Jill Veckel's slave, quote unquote, but not in any bad way. And that's essentially his apologetic when it comes to the Old Testament, while completely missing 2 Kings 4, the widow's oil narrative, and all the rest of that shit. Doesn't give a shit. He talks his way out of that. There's a fucking hours-long video of him talking to Wildheart about Leviticus 25. He explains his way right out of comprehension with the literature as it's there. Just talks his way out of comprehension. It is amazing to watch.
War survivors, they would be forced, they're compelled, yes, they're compelled. They have nowhere else.
Which war survivors are you referring to, Jill? Again, you're not being specific. Are you talking about the war survivors of the defeated instigating? So when you come to World War II, the instigating warring country or nation was Germany, right? So are you talking about the quote unquote war survivors of Germany, or are you talking about the war survivors of the other countries that Germany occupied, that were part of occupied Germany?
Supposed to go, and their men lost the battle. So
okay, their men lost the battle. So he's referring to the quote unquote that war survivors are the women and children or whatever of the men that lost the battle. So the war survivor. So when the U.S. was moving from Normandy, the beaches of Normandy, towards Germany, and they were taking out German forces on their way through occupied France, the French citizens, the French people that were still living in those parts of France, were not war survivors? What the fuck, Jill?
don't put warfare, since it's not fair to the Hebrews. You cannot consider that to be slavery when the Hebrews do it, but when you lock up a black person.
Jill, it's actually worse than slavery. You dip. Oh my God, I hadn't heard this part before.
For robbing a bank, you don't call it slavery. You call it prison.
Oh my God.
When the
Yeah,
Hebrews
they even call it property of the state.
Yes, you are literally state property. There's a movie.
No, you're not. You're a custodian. Oh my God, you're not property of the state. You guys are missing up. You're missing up the fucking idea of being a GI Joe versus being a fucking ward of the state. A ward of the state is not the same as being designated as the state having rights of property rights or rights of ownership over you. Oh my fucking God. Oh fuck. This just got worse. And in fact, let me take that back a little bit. There's something else there.
Since it's not fair to the Hebrews, you cannot consider that to be compelled. Yes, they're compelled. They have nowhere else to go, and their men lost the battle. So I don't.
Yep, covered that.
Warfare, since it's not fair to the Hebrews, you cannot consider that to be slavery when the Hebrews do it, but when you lock up a black person,
okay, but when
for robbing a bank, you don't call it slavery.
What I don't even know how that even follows. But if you lock up a black person, that I don't even want to go there. I don't even know how that follows. But let me go into something real quick here, just to kind of go into what it is that he's talking about there when it comes to fucking warfare in the Bible. Oh my God. Every time I listen to this guy, oh my God, he is such a moron. He is such a moron. All right, so Numbers 31. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, avenge the Israelites on the Midianites. Afterward, you shall be gathered to your people. So Moses spoke to the people, saying, arm some of your number of the war, so that you may go against Midian to execute the Lord's vengeance on Midian. And do you want to know what the whole purpose of the vengeance on Midian is? The fact that some Israelites were willingly participating in Midianite, quote unquote, pagan rituals. God didn't like it and struck the Israelites with a plague for what they were doing. But now there's vengeance that needs to come against Midian, so saith the Lord. Because when the Midians were doing it before, apparently, I guess when they were doing it long before, it didn't warrant it. I don't know. So it says, arm your vengeance of Midian. You shall send 1,000 from each of the tribes of Israel to the war. So out of the thousands of Israel, 1,000 from each tribe were conscripted, 12,000 armed for battle. Moses sent them to war, 1,000 from each tribe, along with Phinehas, son of Eleazar, the priest, which Phinehas was the one that ended the plague earlier in Numbers when he ran the two lovers through with a fucking spear. Because an Israelite dude was canoodling with one of the Midianite chieftain's daughters, and oops. And when Phinehas took it upon himself to run the two of them through, kill them both, plague over. Moses sent them to the war, 1,000 from each tribe, along with Phinehas. Okay, the vessels and the trumpets, and the sounding, and the alarms, and they did battle against Midian, as the Lord had commanded Moses, and killed every male. They killed the kings of Midian, Edi, Rechem, Zur, Hur, blah, blah, blah. They slain them and they killed Balaam. The Israelites took the women of the Midian and their little ones captive, and they plundered all their cattle, their flocks, and all their goods, and their towns where they had settled, and all their encampments they burned. But they took all the spoil and the plunder, both people and animals. Again, they took the plunder and the spoil. Then they brought the captives and the plunder of the spoil to Moses, to Eleazar the priest, and to the congregation of the Israelites at the camp of the plains of Moab by the Jordan opposite Jericho. Moses, Eleazar the priest, and all the leaders of the congregation went to meet them outside the camp. Moses became angry with the officers of the army, the commanders of thousands, the commanders of hundreds, who had come from service in the war. Moses said to them, have you allowed all the women to live? These women here, on Balaam's advice, made the Israelites act treacherously against the Lord in the affair of Peor, so that the plague came among the congregation of the Lord. So again, no accountability here, right? So originally, in the Plague of Peor narrative, earlier in Numbers, it was the accountability issue. It was the fact that Israel was willingly participating in certain rituals with Midian gods. God didn't like and struck them with a plague. That's how some people put this, right? Well, yeah, the Israelites have to be held accountable, right? They're fucking up. They're willfully obeying God or disobeying God. So here comes this plague. Strike these people, right? Hit them. Punish them for what they're doing. Bad children. Bad. But now, here comes it. Moses became angry. And now he says, these women here, on Balaam's advice. What the fuck is Balaam? Made the Israelites act treacherously against the Lord and in the affair of Peor, so that the plague came among the congregation of the Lord. Now, therefore, kill every male among the little ones. Now, do you guys want to know how Jill equivocates this, how he solves this issue? He thinks they're still plagued. he thinks that because in the plague of Pure, there was biological warfare that was happening. Now, in the plague of Pure narrative, the plague, as it says here, struck the congregation of the Lord. And in the plague of Pure narrative earlier in Numbers, it does not say, nothing here or in the plague of Pure narrative earlier in Numbers says anything about the plague affecting the Midianites. It was only on the congregation of the Lord, the Israelites. They were the ones that were contaminated. They were punished by God. God even says, I'm giving you a plague. In fact, let me see if I can find it. I think it even says, yep, there it is. Yep, worship of Baal at Pure. So here we go. So it'll give some context here. What, because you know how Jill is about context. While Israel was staying at Shittim, the people began to have sexual relations with the women of Moab. These invited the people to sacrifice to their gods, and the people ate and bowed to their gods. Thus Israel yoked itself to Baal of Peor, and the Lord's anger was kindled against Israel. The Lord said to Moses, take all the chiefs of the people and impale them in the sun before the Lord in order that the fierce anger of the Lord may turn away from Israel. And Moses said to the judge of Israel, each of you shall kill any of your people who have yoked themselves to the Baal of Peor. Just then, one of the Israelites came and brought a Midian woman into his family in the sight of Moses, in the sight of the whole congregation of Israelites, where they were weeping in the entrance to the tent of meeting. When Phinehas, son of Eleazar, son of Aaron, the priest, saw it, he got up and left the congregation. Taking a spear in his hand, he went after the Israelite man into the tent and pierced the two of them, the Israelite and the woman, through the belly, so that the plague was stopped among the Israelites. Nevertheless, those who died by the plague were 24,000. Right? So I'm not seeing anything here in the worship of Baal Peor that God is necessarily the start of the plague, whatever this plague is. But for some weird reason, the solving of the plague, because this is nevertheless, those who died by the plague were 24,000. So somehow or another, a plague had ensued and killed 24,000 people. And the stopping of this plague, and it says here, the Lord spoke to Moses saying, Phinehas, son of Eleazar, son of Aaron the priest, has turned back my wrath from the Israelites by manifesting such zeal among them on my behalf, that in my jealousy I did not consume the Israelites. Therefore I say, I hereby grant him my covenant of peace. It shall be for him and for his descendants after him a covenant of perpetual priesthood, because he was zealous for God and he made atonement for the Israelites. The plague stopped. Phinehas solved it, killing those two people. End of story. Right? Now go back to Numbers 31. Armed commanders, the thousands, camp outside the camp 7 days. However, it was killed any person and touched a corpse. Purify yourselves. Now they're all of a sudden in Numbers 31. They're concerned about purification. They're concerned about being dirty. So camp outside the camp 7 days. Whoever you have killed is in person to touch the pork. Purify yourselves, you and your captives. On the third and on the seventh day, you shall purify every garment, every article on skin, everything made of goat's hair, and every article of wood. Eleazar the priest said to the troops that you had gone to battle, this statute of the law that the Lord has commanded Moses, gold, silver, bronze, iron, tin, and lead, everything that can be withstand fire, you shall pass through the fire, and it shall be clean. Nevertheless, it shall be purified with water for purification, and whatever cannot withstand fire, you shall pass through the water. You must wash your clothes on the seventh day, and you shall be clean. Afterward, you came into the camp. Right? Then it says disposition of captives and plunder. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, you and Eleazar the priest and the heads of the ancestral houses of the congregation make an inventory of the plunder captured, both human and animal. Does that sound like fucking like people that are being sequestered for their safety? Take an inventory of plunder, both plunder captured, both human and animal. Divide the plunder into two parts between the warriors who went out to battle and all the congregation. From the share of the warriors who went out to battle, set aside tributes to the Lord, blah, 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 blah. This actually gets into how many women were given to each group. And remember, all the young males were killed. The young males who may or may who were not non-combatants, they were all killed. This is in Numbers 31. Jill wants us to buy his horse shit. This is the horse shit apologetics coming from the mouth of that moron. As I said, you want Bible study? My read on the text is that all eunuchs in the monarch period were owned slaves purchased by the monarchy, and they could not own land or be manumitted. Yeah. Well, I've been doing this for 3 hours. I'm going to pause it from here. Hopefully, I've done enough. I'm going to do a shortened version of the Biblical Slavery Challenge refutation. I'm just going to stop there because this is absolutely asinine. Jill is doing. He has not learned anything new. He is still trying to say, "Well, I don't understand. You know, people get mad about these things that they're not mad when it happens today or when a black man gets in prison. That's not what Numbers 31 is even fucking talking about." And I remember having a conversation about this with him one time where we were talking about 2 Samuel 15, and it was about the Amalekites, how God orders Saul to kill all the Amalekites, right? And Jill comes in and he starts talking about how it's basically chemical warfare because he fucked up. He was fucked up between the command of God having King Saul kill all the Amalekites and the plague of Peor and the war against the Midianites. He mixed those two up in a conversation that I had with him on, I think it was it was on Skylar Fiction's channel. It was fucking amazing. And I didn't even catch it at the time. I was like, what in the fuck are you talking about? He's, oh, this is like chemical warfare. The Amalekites was not chemical warfare. The Amalekites had nothing to do with the fucking plague of Peor. And the plague of Peor shit, if you're worried about plague or biological warfare, chemical contamination, biological contamination, why are you keeping all the women? Why are you keeping all the women who haven't slept with men? Absolutely stupid. And with that, I'm done. Have a good day, folks.